Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day. It's been an interesting last few days as we go into sort of an emergency mode surrounding the storm. So we'll do some shows live, some shows pre-recorded. That's just the way we roll with this show. And so it was interesting. It's great to be able to serve the community with live shows when we're in a scenario where a storm is coming. Maybe a storm is hitting, and we can give the latest, most important information to the citizens of coastal Mississippi in this particular case. But it's been a wild and woolly last few days. But listen, I've been looking forward to the next conversation. My friend Mark Henderson from Ocean Aero now has been on the show a bunch of times over the years. Smart guy, someone I just really enjoy spending time with. And we'll get into what he does these days. He was on maybe a couple of months ago, but it's great to check in with him because Ocean Aero is doing some really important work in coastal Mississippi as it relates to the blue economy. And Mark's a good friend of the show. So without any further ado, let's move over to Mark Henderson from Ocean Aero. How you doing, Mark?
I'm great, Ricky. Really appreciate you having me on again. Kind of surprised that I'm still relevant these days.
You're very relevant these days. You know, man, there's a lot. We could look back on a lot of things, and we'll come back to your position, Ocean Aero, here in just a second. But you and your wife Leslie for so long were very focused on the brewery business in coastal Mississippi with Magnolia Brewing Company. Y'all had the first one in the state of Mississippi, had to do a lot of changes in the law and had to fight that and had to fight national disasters and, I don't know, the pandemic and all the, gosh, man. When you go through all that and after you've been there, do you still enjoy a good IPA?
Oh, I do. I mean, that part never goes away. It's like anything else, right? If you take a hobby and you turn it into a business, right? Everybody will tell you, don't do that. And on the other side, right? If you take your passion and then turn it into a business, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
And so the critical piece is the passion. And you never lose that.
I was always fascinated with the fact that you had that business going and you had Log Linear Group going at the same time. Is there anything happening in the Log Linear area these days, or is that on hold, or what's the status of that?
It's still a thing. I spent a little bit of time there, not nearly as much. I got some great people over there that do some great work. Very much on the government contracting side, really leveraging stuff that I did, a decade ago. And, those kinds of things, it's like any other thing that you make investments in. Investments of your time and your energy, right? Generate products and things that, eventually take off. And, at some point, they don't really necessarily need your talents, but they're still there. And there's great people that can shepherd those along and manage those parts of the business. And, thankfully, I'm not necessary there to make those, bring them into fruition. And so I'm very lucky and blessed in that regard. I actually got a call just the other day from a customer from 20 years ago. And they go, hey, look, we got one of your things here. And I was like, it still works.
But, here's the thing.
I mean, it'll help with it.
We'll tell people a little bit about the Log Linear Group, people who have not heard us before, but it's a lot like the pharmaceutical companies. They put years and years in research and development, and they finally get to a point where they have a drug that's viable, and now it's getting tested and finally gets Federal Drug Administration approval, et cetera. And then they've got it, the patent or whatever, and they move forward with it. And you're the same way. I mean, you had patents around sophisticated radar technology. I guess once you had that, you can continue to utilize it in positive ways for yourself.
That's right. I mean, people think about it in terms of you got to patent a great idea or whatever it is, right? And patents are certainly a part of, the overall system. I would tell you that, I encourage people, they're like, I need to patent this idea before I tell you about it. And it's like, I'll be honest with you, the patent isn't worth that much. It's the ideas are not worth that much. What's worth value, what really brings value to the marketplace is your hard work in coming all the way to market with a product, right? It is the blood, sweat, and tears that make a thing. Having a great idea, it's just it's not that valuable. It can be a little bit valuable, but it's just not that valuable. So if you don't have $1 million in revenue, patents aren't worthwhile. that just
Well,
aren't.
that's one of the reasons why I think that experience with Log Linear Group is one of the reasons why, through so many trials and tribulations in your brewery business, you were able to stay the course. But in some respects, you almost didn't have a choice, man, because you had all this capital expenditures, and then bam, I mean, everything gets wiped out. I mean, it's incredible. You look back on it. I bet I tell you, when I think about Katrina and the post world and all that, and where I was, I often tell my friends I'm lucky to even be alive, to be honest with you. Do you ever have that same feeling?
It's kind of interesting to me is that sometimes you just don't have a choice. And Winston Churchill said it as good as anybody has ever said it. And you may have to bleep me here, right? But Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, right, keep on going.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, just don't stop, right? I mean, if you're there, that's not the place to be. Keep going someplace else. And post-Katrina was a lot like that, right? It was just, I mean, I remember the insurance company coming in and the SBA coming in, right? So I filled out the ream of paperwork for the SBA, and then they said, you're bankrupt? And I was like, yeah, I'm actually quite aware. I'm getting mad, as it turns out. And they're like, man, you're not getting a disaster assistance loan. And the insurance company showed up and they said, Mr. Henderson, you have business interruption insurance. It was great on you. You did exactly right. The problem is that you weren't profitable 9 months into your business plan, and so you actually owe us money. And I'm like, I don't think that's how insurance is supposed to work. And they're like, well, read your contract. And at some point there, Leslie and I, we had no other choice, right? We cashed everything in and we bet big on lucky number 7. Now then, I look at it now as an old man, and I go, that probably was not the right decision. But if you're faced with bankruptcy on one side and a minimum of 7 years of purgatory, or a chance that maybe you're going to pull it out, we bet on the chance, and it's worked out for us.
Over the years I've enjoyed telling that story. What an incredible story of resiliency, and then, man, I mean, the pandemic hits. And you have to completely retool your situation. If I remember right, were you making soap or something at one point? But certainly water. That was the big thing. But my God, you had to turn on a dime.
The pandemic hit, and everybody's like, I don't know how bad this is. I'm not sure what this is going to look like, right? And the president says, hey, look, we're just going to shut it all down. Everybody go home, right? Y'all, we're going to tough it out in our homes, and we're going to see where it goes. And I actually gathered all my employees together. I mean, these are people, I know their families, I knew their children, right? And I'm like, I don't know what we're going to do. And I went home that night and I was just like, I don't know. We're not going to make it. Right? I mean, a business, you keep a little bit of cash, but you can't keep enough cash to pay employees for the next 6 months. I mean, I don't know any business that carries that much cash. And I sat on my back porch and I cried, because it was all over with. And it was not because I did anything wrong. It was just that I didn't know what to do. And I woke up the next morning and Leslie and I said, hey, look, we got stuff to make hand sanitizer, don't we? And so we went in, she pulled up the World Health Organization recipe and we figured out how to make it out of stuff we had at the brewery. And we made and sold hand sanitizer for the community. Gave a lot away to people, first responders and those kinds of people. And you figure it out, right? And that's one of the things is that, it's real easy to say, look, I'll just wait for somebody to come and show up and help. And then, what I love about Mississippi and the South in general is that, we've never had much. And you got a lot of friends and family and neighbors, and we all come together and we figure it out. We put the pieces together and make it happen.
It's so, people are torn in their careers, whether they should pursue a great idea for a business or a product or whatever, or whether they should continue in their career, maybe working for somebody else. And Ann and I were talking about that the other day. I got lucky in my career in that I've always been very independent minded, and I got involved in a program for the company that owned the Sun Herald. And it was literally a re-engineering program where we were centralizing and putting, very sophisticated databases in place for our company in ways that we were early adopters of a lot of really advanced technology. And I was involved in those efforts and led a lot of those efforts. And I had the opportunity to work with some really, really smart consultants, change consultants. So being involved in organizational change efforts was a real big part of my career. Well, that opportunity to do that and work on the corporate level at a young age really kind of opened up many doors for me as it relates to not only Knight Ridder and McClatchy later, but also the company that I ultimately went to work for. And I think about, I got lucky. I had good success working for someone else. But if you're working, it's hard sometimes to have good success working for someone else. You got to take the risk. And you did it the other way. You did it a harder way. When we get back on the other side, we'll reflect a little bit about that, and then we'll shift gears as we continue our conversation with Mark Henderson. We'll see you after this. Well, welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Mark Henderson, who works with Ocean Aero in coastal Mississippi. We'll get into some specifics about that here in just a second, but we're just catching up, and just as we normally do, we end up sort of venturing off a bit. And in some respects, it's always important because Mark has a lot of lessons to teach about, what is your appetite for risk? That's sort of where we were when we went to break, because I had the opportunity to work for a publicly owned company where I became a CEO of a subsidiary. And then same scenario working for a privately owned company. But if you had to define what it is that made me successful in my media career, it was that I was willing to stomach a tremendous amount of risk. Whoo, buddy. I mean, big time risk. I mean, I was out hanging to dry. And it was, when I said yes to some of these things I was involved in, man, I had to be all in. I had to give everything I've got, and it was not easy. It was not easy at all. But if you're going to find success, you got to be willing to. I think usually the success you find, and this is true with you, Mark, is completely related to the amount of risk that you're willing to take. And that really defines you, doesn't it?
It does. I would say that risk is a critical piece of it. And there's actually real data that actually talks about this, right? It says, hey, look, by and large, the riskier you are, right, the better your outcome is going to be. Now, you have to also be very careful and very cognizant of, not putting it all on the table. You got to put like 99.9% of it on the table. I think the other critical aspect of it is hard work and, putting in the effort. And there's a little bit of luck as well, right? There's probably equal parts on all of those, right? Your tolerance for, at least Leslie and I, we waited much later. We got married way too young, way too early to be making those kinds of life decisions. I was 23, she was 21. And, but we waited a long time to have children, start a family and do those kinds of things. And so we opened up our risk tolerance. I mean, starting a new business with a young family and you got to have diapers and formula and all stuff. That's, I know that since I've had children, my tolerance for risk has gone down. And it scares me a little bit in some ways. I'm still, as everybody knows, right, I'm still very high risk and high energy, and I work way too much and, all those kinds of things. But it is interesting to see how your life changes and as it evolves and, all the things come in. So
hey, listen. Yeah, it is. Listen, before we get to Ocean Aero, just one other quick comment. I've enjoyed watching coastal Mississippi tourism become externally focused over the past year or two, since you and I were deeply engaged in the need for change within that organization and sort of how elected officials saw it. I mean, we got to a point, really, and not to relive a lot of moments in that, but we got to a point where this first really important regional organization after Hurricane Katrina was really at risk itself. Yeah. And, I think, you saw changes on the Board of Supervisors in Harrison County. I think, some of that might have been somewhat related to the dabbling that was taking place related to tourism. But at the end of the day, Hancock County, Jackson County, Harrison County rallied. The voters rallied. Judy Young, I think, all report cards on her, the executive director of Coastal Mississippi's tourism. is very good. That she's been a good transitional leader.
Yep.
I think that leadership on the board has done a good job of kind of wading through all of this, and I think we're in a good place. I'm really pleased with what I see. You're not involved anymore, but certainly you have to be paying close attention. Do you see the same thing I see when you look at it?
I do, and it's great to see the board become much more functional, and you see people focused not on the internal pieces, as you said, right, but on the real challenges that we have, right, and how do we grow our community? And I mean, the reality is that we're all together in this. The three coastal counties. It's interesting to me is that the coast is absolutely an amazing place, not only to live, but also in terms of the resources that we bring to bear on the hard problems of getting more and more resources here to bring people here and all those kinds of things. And, we're stronger together. We need the art communities that are Ocean Springs and the art communities that are Bay St. Louis. And we also need the places that are more industrialized, and we need the places that are more touristy. And together, we bring it together. And we're stronger as a result. And it's good to see those changes have happened.
There's no doubt about that, man. I mean, one of the things that make this such a great region, look, we talked about this a bunch of times. We're a collection of unique communities, each with their own special sense of place. That's what makes coastal Mississippi so amazing. But when it comes to our common issues, man, we got to get together. I mean, I don't care if it's economic development, tourism, recovering from a storm, whatever it is, we're stronger together. And that, to me, is one of the most powerful lessons that came out of Katrina. It's the most powerful lesson that came from the bumps in the road around our regional tourism effort. It's, more recently with the recent storm, it's another opportunity to see how we are stronger together. Mark, we can't emphasize that enough, can we?
No, we can't. And I don't necessarily understand the struggle. I mean, there are times, I think John Harrison once described it as that sometimes we collectively act like a bucket of crabs. And for people who don't know how that works, right, so you can take a bucket of crabs and sit them on your dock and none of them get out. And it's because they all hold everybody back. And you're like, if they would just get together and work cohesively, there wouldn't be a single crab left in that bucket. But you can leave that bucket there for days, and those crabs will just sit there and won't let anybody leave. And so
that is, I've not heard John give that analogy before, but that's a perfect analogy. Let me give you another one. When it's super low tide, we've got this little bay head. My pier is long and it gets out to deep water, but on the way along the marshes is a little bay head swamp. It's great. It's tidal flow, and we can catch bait there. It's awesome. But when the tide is super low, it's mud flats. And this year especially, the fiddler crabs have been unbelievable in number. I don't know why that is. I've never seen so many fiddler crabs. In our entire history here, I've never seen that many. Okay? But here's the interesting thing. If you go and stand, they don't move. Or they'll just move a little bit. And there may be hundreds of them, okay? But you move like quickly. And they move in unison, man. They move in unison to get off the flat. But you can stop and they'll stop. Then you move and they move in unison again. It's the darndest thing, man. But that's a sort of a wonderful contrast to what you just said. When you're moving together, man, it just makes so much sense. Hey, listen, we'll start this here, but we'll finish on the other side of the break. But you're at Ocean Aero. This company, I mentioned that I was at a birthday party to one of my grandkids at the yacht club recently, looking out over that Ocean Aero footprint at the Port of Gulfport. And I told you before we started the show, the curb appeal of Ocean Aero, before you get into the advanced technology and the work that you guys are doing around the world, someone put a lot of thought into this overall brand of this company. But the curve appeal of the building is a great way to make a statement that you guys are pretty serious about what you're doing.
It does. And it's interesting. You and I have talked about this in the past, which is that, those of us that are very technical in nature, right, oftentimes are not the best people in business. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're an accountant or an attorney or a doctor or an engineer, right, is that you got to have a pretty holistic view of business. And, my experience says, hey, look, branding's pretty important. You got to be able to tell your story. And people have got to be able to look at it very quickly and figure out, are you serious and are you putting in the effort? And Kevin Decker, the CEO here, right, he won me over. It took a little bit of time, right? Him and I danced around whether or not we were going to work together or not. And he showed me over and over and over again just how serious he was about every little detail. And you and I both know, right? There's only one thing that counts, and it's the details. Every one of them.
Yeah.
And every one of them. And you got to look at all of those little things. I mean, how does the building look? When you walk in, do the employees care enough to make sure that there are no screws on the floor? How does that pay off when it actually comes to production? Well, if they know that the CEO is willing to bend down and pick up a little piece of trash to put it in the trash can, right? That shows then in their work ethic as well, right? I mean, they now have an example and a standard by which to work off of. And you go, well, what does that do? Well, it means that there's no FOD in the boat, right? There's no way for things to get caught. When people see something that's even a little bit wrong, they ask the questions. And that's how you make a quality product, right? And it starts with the leadership at the very top, and it goes all the way down to the very bottom. And you can tell those places that are run properly that way.
Don't ask anyone to do something that you're not willing to do yourself.
That's right.
And, that team approach like that is so important. Well, listen, you guys are making autonomous, unmanned submarines that are deployed all around the world. And when we get back on the other side, we'll give people a little bit about what Ocean Aero is all about. And I'm actually curious about what happened when these unmanned subs are out in the Gulf of Mexico and a storm's coming. What do you do about that? I'm just curious about that. But when we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Mark Henderson. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend Mark Henderson, who works at Ocean Aero at the Port of Gulfport, part of the blue economy. He's involved with R&D. And I would think that he's probably a jack of all trades there when you really get down to it. But hey, Mark, before we get too deep into where you're deployed and what's happening, explain, if you were to talk to someone who's a layman about one of these autonomous submarines, talk about how big it is and what does it do and where's the technology and where are they deployed? Give us some sense of this.
Yeah, so I think the right way to think about it is that we've got a 14-foot long autonomous sailboat submarine, which sounds like the dumbest idea ever. And the first time I heard it, I was like, man, that's I don't think that's not this, no. And the first time you watch one sail around, you're like, all right, well, that's kind of cool, sailing around, right? I can see some operational utility in that. And then you watch it dive, and you're like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. And then it, pops up someplace else and comes back to the surface and puts its wing back up and sails off. And you're like, all right, I need one. I don't, right? I mean, you kind of have this emotional response to it. And so we call it the first dual modality platform. That is, it is intended to be as useful and happy on top of the water as it is below the water. And as you might imagine, that gets very complex. You need to know if you're going to sail. Anybody who sails in the listening area will know that, hey, look, you need to know what directional wind's coming from. So how does a robot know that? And you go, well, you got to have an anemometer. Only you got to have one that goes underwater. And if you get out in the marketplace and say, hey, look, I need an anemometer that goes underwater, people are like, well, wind speeds don't happen underwater, right? I mean, they look at you like it's the dumbest idea ever. And so it certainly drives complexity. And that's never the hallmark of good design. But at the same time, that complexity buys you lots of things, right? So you take, for example, bad weather and heavy waves and heavy winds, right? In that case, we just dive down. Salt water, right? We just go underneath it. We just dive. And, it turns out that once you get, anybody that's ever been on a submarine or anything else, right, knows that once you get, 20 feet, 30 feet underneath the waves, you don't feel anything at all. Nothing's happening. And so, how much, how rugged do you need to build this thing? The Navy builds their surface ships out of steel and lots of it. All the guys at HII, right? That are welding all day, every day. We don't need to be that strong because when the weather gets that rough, we just go underneath. And then it also touches things like, what happens if somebody tries to get you, right? If you're an autonomous boat and you're out doing surveillance or reconnaissance or something like that, or even if you're just down in the Gulf of Mexico and you're worried about some Cajuns, not the Cajuns would ever abscond with a boat that's floating out there all by itself. We do exactly the same thing. You just go underneath, right? You just dive and get away. And so you spend a lot of time on the sensors side of it, the cameras. So we design and build our own machine learning AI, interfaces so the boat can actually recognize boats on the water and people on the water and take appropriate behaviors and actions. You want to make sure that you don't run into other people. You want to make sure that you respond properly to weather and all those kinds of things. There's a lot going on there.
Hey, listen, I saw one. I'm pretty sure that I saw one. It's been a month or 2 or 3 ago. It was out offshore, and I thought it was a weather buoy. I don't even know if we have any weather buoys offshore anymore, but I thought it was a weather buoy, and I said, "I'll be darned! They redeployed a weather buoy." So I started running toward it, and suddenly it wasn't there anymore. It just freaking vanished. That's the only thing it could have been. But I bet you've heard that story before, huh?
I have. We hear it on a regular basis. So we're conducting missions all over the Gulf of Mexico. We're doing a good bit of stuff right now with the oil and gas industry, doing pipeline inspection. So, not trying to take anybody's job away from them, right? But what we're trying to do is really bring inspections to the 21st century. And, right now they have to inspect oil lines, pipelines on a regular basis, once a year or something like that. And we think it should be more often than that. If they're really going to keep an eye on these things. And in fact, we found some just south of Dauphin Island, went and inspected those and found, they put like protective mats over them when they cross over other pipelines and do stuff like that. And found one where a protective mat had gotten shifted off. And then we came back with our side scan and noticed that there were shrimp trawler marks that went over exactly that same spot. And so, you got fishermen and you want them to pursue their livelihoods and be able to make their money and do all the things, but you also need to be able to keep the infrastructure safe as well. And there's a lot of bits and pieces of that. So using all kinds of different sensors and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
So Mark, when you were doing, well, you still do Log Linear Group, the company that we discussed earlier with your sophisticated radar technology and other stuff that you're doing, working out at Stennis. You think about Stennis and all of the blue chip industries that are part of that, and technology and the private sector applications and the military applications. A lot of that experience really played in here because even though it's somewhat different technology, it's still about maximizing the commercialization of what you're developing. So I can see NOAA, I can see National Weather Service, I can see obviously you mentioned the oil and gas industry and how that I can obviously see huge military possibilities related to this, but it's really the sky's kind of the limit, isn't it?
No, it's the future, right? Robots are our future. We don't need to be putting people in the way of, any of us that have been out on the water know that it's not a safe place, right? There's like a million ways for things to go wrong. And, having robots take over these things and monitor these things and keep up with these things, whether it be for national defense and keeping us safe from bad guys or keeping it safe from ourselves, having the ability to, have long-term endurance and long-term monitoring, frees up a lot of people and resources to do more productive things, right? It's great.
Hey, listen, I had the opportunity the other morning. I get up early, and I just happened to get up and saw on X the notification that the Dawn launch was about to happen. I forgot the exact one for SpaceX, but I watched it. And man, they've got the crew quarters that you can observe during the launch, and then it breaks away, and then you have a camera attached to the main fuel, whatever you call that rocket that comes back and lands, and you get to see the landing, and then you see the weightlessness start to occur in the crew and all that. But man, technology, buddy, it is incredible what you can do with technology today.
It is. Starlink's a great example. So Kyle and I were talking about it just a few minutes ago, right? Is that, You can now have, high-speed internet anywhere on the planet. We are actually putting Starlinks on our boats. A 14-foot boat in the middle of the ocean now has Starlink capability, full internet speeds anywhere on the planet. Now, Ricky, that is game-changing for everybody in any. I mean, think about right now. Weather is a big thing, and you get storms in the Gulf, right? And they're moving around, and people are trying to figure out where they're going to go. But right now, we have insufficient data to actually predict these things accurately. And you go, well, we got satellites up, and you go, yeah, satellites are great. They tell you exactly what's happening from the surface up. And what you miss is that 70% of the planet is covered in water, and we got effectively no information from the surface down.
Yeah. Isn't that something? I mean, it's really, listen, one of the tropical guys I follow is Mike's weather page, and he has spaghettimodel.com. It's just got an interesting personality, but he's been doing it so long, he's gotten darn good at it. He's also chasing storms now. Sounds like you are familiar with Mike.
But spaghetti models for sure.
Yeah. So but anyway, he's chasing, and he's got Starlink in his truck. Yeah. And so the other morning when he was chasing the recent storm, he was doing some Wi-Fi power tests. He was doing it while he was, doing his kind of live show. And some of the numbers that he was telling us about that he was getting from Starlink inside his truck out in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana, it was really impressive. But, you think, I mean, it's played into effect during the war in Ukraine. And, I mean, but Elon Musk, I mean, that guy is a game changer across every dimension, isn't he?
There's a lot going on, and he's got his own views, on the political spectrum, and there are people that are on both sides of that. What you cannot deny is the man has done just an absolutely phenomenal job of pushing the technology forward. I mean, I grew up in a time when NASA was amazing and doing crazy things. And then NASA got kind of stodgy, right? They got risk averse. And you go, well, of all the people that should be risk averse, it shouldn't be NASA. And he's been able to monetize and push the technology forward. He's done an amazing job.
It's been hard watching Boeing's failures on that regard as well, unfortunately. But hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll have a final segment with my friend Mark Henderson and see what the future looks like for the work that he's involved in. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I love saying from the Citizens Bank Studio. We're so thrilled to have them as the primary sponsor of the studio here for this show. It's terrific to have great partners like that involved. And we're chatting with my friend Mark Henderson, who is involved heavily in the technology side and the R&D side, Ocean Aero at the Port of Gulfport, this company that he actually had experience with, this company from San Diego that he had experience with before it actually moved to Gulfport. And they're here now, and he's working with them. And they're a very important player in this blue economy conversation we're having in coastal Mississippi. Look, before we continue the conversation, I just want to give props to my buddy, Kyle Curley, the producer of the show. You don't see this, but we had a little technical glitch, and Kyle seamlessly kind of made sure we moved forward, and he doesn't miss a leg. I'm so lucky to have Kyle supporting this show. I know you hear me say that a lot, but he's the man. He's the man. And because he's playing really, really amazing music at the Superdome, maybe Saints are going to have a home field advantage this year like none other because they're playing good and because Kyle is playing great music. So Kyle's hitting on a bunch of cylinders just like our guest, Mark Henderson. But, hey, you've heard me say that a few times over the last 4 or so years, haven't you, Mark?
I have heard it.
So, look, it's so interesting. When we sign off after we do shows, people will go, Kyle, love you, man. They got to know Kyle really good. Kyle, were you going to say something?
No, just a Mark Headroom reference, probably.
You're the man. You're the man. Hey, so Mark, you think about Ocean Aero. Where do you go from here? What kind? I mean, I don't. You can say what you can talk about. I'm sure there's a lot you can't talk about, but you really do have these submarines deployed around the world, don't you?
We do. I think we're in 6 foreign countries right this minute. We've got 2 boats that are in transit to Australia. And we're generating a lot of interest, right? I mean, a lot of people are looking at the technology and going, holy cow, I mean, this is potentially game-changing kind of technology. And we talked about it just a second ago, right? I mean, the idea is that, our boat fundamentally spans the gap between the underwater world and the above water world. And it fills a niche that a lot of people are looking at and going, yeah, I mean, how do I do that? How do I, you got these, whether it be on the military side or other places, right? You've got structure that's underneath the water, and you need to bridge the gap to the air. And, with our technology and the way that we've been able to marinize things and, the things that we're pushing out to the edge, we're doing, just like autonomous cars these days are learning how to drive themselves. The boats are doing exactly the same stuff. We're using exactly the same technology and pushing processing to the edge, and then also, spanning that gap with things like Starlink to acoustic comms underwater, so that you can be both places simultaneously.
It's really cool stuff. Hey, when you think about competitive advantage, is there embedded technology that's very specific to you guys that you've been able to really maintain a good separation from potential competitors?
So there's Warren Buffett loves moats, right? He likes to invest in businesses that have moats. Now, he understands those from the financial standpoint. And we talked about Elon Musk a few minutes ago. Elon says there is no such thing as a moat, right? Venture capital these days can take down any wall. The only moat that really exists is speed, right? How fast are you moving forward? Because people behind you are going to catch up if you stop. And you talked about it a minute ago, right? Boeing right now is struggling both on the aircraft side and on the spacecraft side. And they're struggling fundamentally because they got complacent and they started, sitting on their laurels and thinking that they were too big and that nobody could compete with them. And the reality is the SpaceX just absolutely leapfrogged them. And they did so, right? Because you take enough money and enough smart people and enough focus and drive, and you can do anything. And that to me plays in so many different ways, which is that we can legitimately do anything. We can solve any problem. We can take any hill, right? We can fix any wrong. And we can do it. It just takes will, both political and, emotional will. And it takes putting the right resources against the problem.
Well, what comes to mind almost immediately is how big are you guys willing to think? Because right now you're building autonomous submarine sailboats, but might you be building robots that fly in the future? I mean, I don't know. But once you bring these skill sets into the conversation and you bring them together, what does the diversification of Ocean Aero look like in the future? It'd be interesting to see.
So we actually flew one the other day. So it wasn't like, rotor aircraft or anything fancy like that, right? Yeah. But, there's this whole idea of, how fast are you moving? And, when Kevin came to me and said, hey, look, this is a project, this is what we're doing, right? I said, hey, look, if you're willing to move fast, I'm willing to move with you. And we are blazing a trail about as fast as anybody has ever done it.
Ocean Aero at the Port of Gulfport on the cutting edge, doing amazing things. That's when we talk about the blue economy, of our proximity to the water and growing that part of our economy. That's what we're talking about. I would say the poster child for that is Ocean Aero. Hey, listen, Mark, it's been great to catch up with you, my friend.
Pleasure of mine, Ricky. Always call me.
Always good to catch up with you. Listen, have a great day, and we will talk to you tomorrow.